welcome to this first ever ABN webinar. We're hosting it with our friends from GE Aerospace. And the topic of today's conversation is how quality data can improve airline safety. My name is Lee Hayhurst. I am the editorial director at Aviation Business News, and I'll be moderating today's session. We are joined by two leading experts from GE Aerospace themselves. So we have, in the bottom left of my screen, we have, firstly, we have Mark Carroll, who's the industry consultant for flight safety, GE Aerospace Software as a Service. Joining Mark is Denise Decker, and she is the product manager for Safety Insight at GE Aerospace. Welcome, guys. I'm also delighted to say that joining us is Dr. Ip-Ching Fan. Dr. Fan is in the UK, where I am today. He is the course director of the MSc in Aviation Digital Technology Management at Cranfield University. We know Dr. Fan quite well at our business because he's previously spoken at our Predictive Aircraft Maintenance Conference in London. So welcome, Dr. Fan, and welcome everybody to today's session. What our three experts will be bringing today is their expertise in the role of high quality data on flight safety. So they'll be drawing on their expertise in aviation and aerospace. Dr. Fan in particular will highlight how accurate and actionable data empowers pilots to make critical real-time decisions, enhancing operational safety and efficiency. So we'll go through a number of questions. For those of you who are watching this on broadcast, you can input some questions in the chat and we will endeavour to answer those, even if it's just on follow-up afterwards. So please do that. Okay, let's kick off with our first question. So we're going to look at how strong data and quality practices combined with the correct digital solutions can help airlines not only improve flight safety, but also strengthen enterprise system adoption. So I think we're going to bring Mark in firstly for that question. So Mark, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Lee. First, thanks for the opportunity. It's great to be here. On behalf of Dr. Fang and Denise and myself, hopefully you hear the passion we have about flight safety and flight data. So when it comes to flight data, specifically what we're talking about, focal programs, flight data monitoring, we're talking about large volumes of data, time series data coming from the aircraft used for safety. And when we dig into data quality and program adoption, why these are important and what we should be doing, we got to first start with, these are trust-based programs. So in the safety world, the trust in the program is critical for everyone, from a frontline manager to the leaders, to the subject matter experts, to everybody that is working in the programs. And what is trust? What's it built on? Things you would imagine: transparency, accountability, governance. But right near the top of that list is at the heart of your question, which is trust in data quality and adoption, and why those are so important. At the heart of this is the data. Bad data in leads to bad information, leads to bad decisions, or the vice versa. So it's really important when people are working in these programs to set this up and invest in it from the beginning. Strong data quality practices and parameter validation, analysis verification, tools, all the technology to support that. So you have good data in, you can get to good information, and ultimately get to good decisions down the road. But along the adoption front, important to data quality is also the communication vehicle in which you use to distribute that information. So what am I talking about specifically? You have to meet the stakeholder where they are. You have to meet the frontline manager or the pilot or the technician where they are with this data. So for example, a flight training manager, they're going to ingest this data very differently than a frontline employee like a pilot or a maintenance technician. They're sitting in the office. They're looking at the big picture. They're used to looking at dashboards and systemic analysis. They can do that. They have direct access to the team that is working in the flight data. But a pilot or a maintenance technician, these are mobile folks. They're tactical. They're out on the road. They need targeted and specific information in their hands about what they're going to be working on today. Where are they flying today? What aircraft are they on today? They're not going to read a 20-page report or go to a dashboard. So when we talk about data quality, it's imperative, it's critical in establishing the trust in the program and in the data, which will lead to adoption. So I think that's what is fundamental in building these and I think key to the success.
Yeah. So Denise, it's from what Mark said then, although we're talking about data and technology today, there's a really important human element to this as well.
Definitely. Especially like Mark already mentioned, we have all these different user personas taking the data in. Flight data is not always perfect, and it's not about it being perfect. So for the analyst, you can display the data and also show if it's corrupt on certain instances, so they can go to their maintenance department to fix that. But for a pilot, you want them to have data that is already cleaned up and providing them correct information so they can, in a short amount of time, take operational decisions. And it's really critical to clean the data in a way that fits each user persona.
Yeah. So almost personalize it to the user, which is what happens in the consumer world as well. This is B2B, yes, but you hear it in B2C all the time. Dr. Fan, I know you're very much sort of man and machine. You train the young engineers and the young talent of the future. What's your analysis of how people react to data and technology to enhance, optimize adoption?
That is a really important question for us today, because it would be meaningful for us to look back. The way that we are running our civil aviation systems were essentially designed back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where we only have pen and paper. And the way that we have to do that is to ensure that we have the right people in the right place, ask them to do the job, make sure that they have the record, and then we have additional layers of people for oversight and additional layers of paper in terms of recording. Mm-hmm. And so when we now have the opportunity to get computer data, it actually helps us to be able to have those information and build evidence-based decision-making, and building on that analysis so that we can look at lessons learned in a systematic way and improve the way that we do things in the future. So when we talk about the newer generation of people coming into the industry, it's kind of very much implicit that they assume the data is there and they can do those kind of things. And to some extent, some of the adoption that industry have to put in is to catch up to the expectation of our next generation of users, be they pilots, engineers, managers.
I suppose the trick here is, Dr. Fan, is to, we're talking about almost the data, the system helping to make the decision, but allowing the human to have that degree of flexibility to bring their own experience into this, because the data will only get you so far, but it will certainly inform that decision.
Absolutely. That's the mix. And that makes what we do fascinating. Looking across the aviation industry worldwide, there's a long gap between those who are at the front line of technology innovation and those who are running the operation in the old way and still trying to catch up. So getting the right mix of people, technology in the situation of that particular airline or operator or organization is a fascinating thing.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about, at the end of that question, allowing people to make their own sort of judgment, because the data doesn't necessarily tell you everything, particularly as it's set up originally. You want it set up, as Mark was saying, you set things up so that it's trustworthy from the beginning. But of course, circumstances are always different. So the next question, which we'll go to Denise first on this, is how do we deal with combining flight data and contextual information, things like obviously weather and things that you can't necessarily predict and the data wouldn't predict. What's the key best practice in terms of contextual?
So flight data on its own, it's really good at telling you what happened. It doesn't necessarily tell you why it happened. So sometimes we actually need more contextual information to get a more holistic picture of what happened. And as an example, we can look at an unstable approach. So for example, an aircraft is approaching an airfield, they are flying too fast and they are configuring late. And we see that in the data. We know that it happened, but we don't know why it happened. So when we pull in weather reports, we can see, for example, there are thunderstorms around the airfields. When we put in pilot fatigue reports, we can see that the pilots had a very long working day behind them. This was their latest leg. That might have also affected their focus and their stress levels. And then in addition, when we look at maintenance data, we can see they had a mail item requiring special crew procedures, which are not day-to-day procedures that they do every day, also adding to their stress levels. So now with all this information, this gives us a much better idea of why this unstable approach had to happen on this flight. And knowing more can make it easier for us to make mitigations for the future.
Yeah. Are there other kinds of contextual information that you can bring to bear, or do we have? This is quite unstructured data, so there's lots of it out there. How do you take this fairly unstructured data and put it into what is essentially a very structured and disciplined system?
So that's definitely a challenge on how to bring it in. It is about merging the correct sources together. And sometimes it will look like having just text fields additionally pasted to your flight data, but that could still help the analyst understand what happened here. In our case, the weather information is added to the data in such a way that we can also filter on it and add it to analysis. So even for trends, we can see if we have more event rates, if we have thunderstorms in the vicinity. It really depends on the kind of data that you're adding.
Yeah. Dr. Fan, I'll bring you in. I know, and you'll know that when we discuss the role of data and insights into how particularly pilots are operating in the world of predictive aircraft maintenance, when we talk about that, and I suppose safety is very similar. There's always a sense that the pilots themselves don't feel like they want to be sort of overridden and told what to do. They have their own. We sort of picked up on that before. Have their own experience and instincts on here. So it's a question of and what we always say at PAM is that if you can sell this to the pilot and say this is making you a better pilot, this is all about making you better at what you do, which means you're providing a better service for your customers in the actual aircraft itself. Then you get buy-in. Is that's probably critical? There's a bit of psychology here, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. I think we are all selfish. We want to do things that is going to be useful for us. So the use of the flight data is an important part. But following on what Denise says, that coupling with the background and the other ranges, it helps us to do some of those root cause analysis. So if we have, say, weather situation, seasonal thing, maybe on the airport, we may be able to help the pilot to justify and explain that in certain approach, they have to do things in a certain way, and help that planning of the flights and the execution of the flights. But also important, some of the other sources of data that Denise didn't have time to mention, if the pilot know what are the passenger profile in that particular cabin, if it is a lot of school children or if it is a lot of business people, those behavior can also influence how the pilot can make decision if they need to perhaps do sudden diversion or if they need to kind of make sure that certain things are happening easier to keep the passengers happy. And all these are combinations that help in making better decision. And without the data, we may be able to ask cabin crew, we may make a guess, but if we have the data, we can actually have things in a much more systematic way. So being able to have the combined intelligence so we can plan, look forward, And when we accumulate the data, we can use pattern to look for root causes and avoid situations that put us into difficulty. All these are the power of data that once we get people to think about their job and how they can improve their job, it will be something that all reasonable pilots and maintenance crew and managers will find useful.
Yeah. I suppose the thing here, Dr. Fan said, have make better decisions. The key to that is the feedback to say that was a better decision, because in a sense, if things go well, none of the customers are going to praise you for successfully landing an aircraft, but they don't know what went into that landing of a particular aircraft. That it could have gone not so well, but the pilot made a decision so that it was a better outcome. So the key thing probably, Mark, is to feed that back into the professionals so that those operational behaviours are optimized, but they know they did the right thing, and then they'll do the same thing, and the trust is built through that as well, isn't it?
It's absolutely key, and and being able to show someone the outcome. But they'll make that bigger decision to take a step back and double down on what Denise and Dr. Fan said. You make better decisions when you see the whole picture. You see a wider aperture. You see what's going on. You're more set up for success and making a good decision. So the more information you can set, the more you can fuse with your flight data, the more information you can put there. You're just setting your team up for success. You're going to get better decisions faster, and keep that feedback loop going to them, which creates more. Yeah.
And of course, that's success in an airline and in the aviation industry is not always. It's never about one person. A successful pilot has a massive team behind them, and we've already talked about the role of operators and maintenance and so on, and crew behind that. So let's go to go to Dr. Fan firstly for this one about extending the use of just the flight data sort of beyond the pilot. We touched on a little bit, but there's clearly huge uses of data in terms of being more proactive, being more resilient and efficient. We've sort of mentioned predictive maintenance as an example of that. So what's happening in that area, and how does that impact the overall operational efficiency of the airline and the aircraft?
What I like to use is a tire change as an example. I think the illustration may help. So, of course, if we're familiar with the industry, we know that if an aircraft needs to have a tire change, if the tire, the people, the tool, and all the correct things are in place, we probably can do it in 15 to 20 minutes. So if an aircraft is on the gate and something needs to be done, we can probably do that without the passenger knowing the tire had changed. And so no disruption to operation, everything goes smoothly. However, if we're in a station where the tire is in a warehouse in the other side of the airport, in a big airport, it may take an hour to bring the tire to the aircraft. And if we're in an outfield where they don't have any spare tires in stock, it may take 2 days, 3 days in order to ship the thing in. And so it becomes an AOG, which nobody like.
Yeah.
So if you look at the information that can help us to manage those situations, now, of course, we do our reliability report. If we're good in doing our planning in maintenance and engineering, we probably roughly estimate how many tires we need in which station over what time for the whole fleet and the flight schedule. So that is a high level aggregate. So it hopefully work, but sometimes it may not. Now, if we have the equivalent of the AMOS information coupled with the tech log information, it may allow us to begin to narrow down the prediction to a tail, a particular aircraft. If we have the additional flight data that actually track the flights every day, then it may actually help us to get that prediction to a particular tail, to a particular day, to a particular station, to reduce the likelihood that we run out of spare tires in that particular situation. And so in the way that we can combine data, all data are useful, but different level of data help us to do different granularity of prediction. And I would say if we get all this combined in the right way, coupled with our supply chain organization, then we should be able to avoid spare tires outage as a reason for AOG. And that is a huge thing for the operators.
Yeah, I mean, Denise, what that example that Dr. Fan just gave is it's more critical today than ever before because of the situation we know the industry is in terms of the continuing supply chain issues, the availability of parts, and so on. So there must be a massive focus on this just because it helps the industry work more efficiently, and as Dr. Fan said, it prevents those really damaging, both in terms of reputational and commercial AOGs.
Yes, I really like the example that Dr. Fan provided here with the spare tire change. And I definitely think we see a lot of use cases where maintenance can also really benefit from the use of flight data, also for those predictive analytics for the future. But we see this extending even into other areas, like, for example, if you look at fuel efficiency is not necessarily independent of safety, because the procedures you apply for fuel efficiency could also have an impact on your safety statistics. So if you want to have the trust of your pilots, coming back to the trust issue again, it's also important for them to know that you take into account safety when you look at fuel efficiency procedures, so that you only advise them to do a certain procedure if it's actually safe to do so. So for example, if we're talking about a reduced flap landing, maybe only plan to do that if your aircraft weight is below a certain weight, if your landing runway is long enough, if there are no mail items on the aircraft. And if we have all that information, we can also feed that back to the pilots to make a good decision.
Yeah, we've moved into talking about how data helps with things like sustainability, preventing AOGs, and moved a little bit away from safety, which is the core topic of today. But actually, as Denise indicated there, safety actually sits beneath this all the time. You don't want to be having to do an overly rushed change of a tire, for instance. And if you can use data to allow you to give that time to do what's needed to do, ultimately that is a safer way of operating an aircraft.
It is absolutely. And if by putting these things together, you get into that one single source of truth, that single source of data. And both of those groups are speaking the same language and starting at with the same source of information. So it's like whack-a-mole. A lot of operators get into that. Fuel does this, which creates a safety problem. Safety does this, which creates an on-time problem. And if you can have that discussion together at once, you will get to a solution much faster, which is a lot better downstream. And you can get out of that game of, just pulling a mitigation lever only to have something else pop up somewhere else. So truly, that is the most important part of expanding this data across other users in fuel and maintenance and operations, compliance. Safety has done a great job using flight data for a long time, but the other parts of the business would greatly benefit from it and can catch up independently, but most importantly, when that conversation happens together.
Yeah.
So really, really, really important.
It's when you start talking like this about the data that goes beyond the flight operational data that you start to understand, I think, a point you made earlier, Mark, about different types of data working together, not being in silos. This is often the big challenge for large operational organizations, is that they get into a situation where one part of the business was never designed to speak to another part of the business. But when we talking to you guys about how airlines need to operate, it's kind of safety critical that all systems talk to each other. Is that, do you think, Mark, is that happening today? Are airlines addressing this? Is it easy to do?
I wouldn't say it's easy to do, but I think there are definitely varying levels of maturity that we see across the industry, across the globe, as Dr. Pham pointed out earlier. So you have some that are getting really good at it, and integrating their SMS, integrating flight data with other sources, with other systems, and using it across departments. And there are some that are learning. The hard part is still the human part. So technology is solvable quickly. The human part of sitting in the room and making good decisions is still a challenge. But this is the mechanism. It's one of those tools in the toolkit that can serve as the conduit to make that happen. And it's easier because you're speaking the same language. You're speaking from the same sheet of music, which helps a lot.
Yeah. We're already at our final question, and we'll stick with Mark actually, but we'll sort of take that thought on. You just talked about some airlines being ahead of the game on this, and there's always going to be a kind of mixed picture. But actually, the aviation industry is famed for its collaboration, particularly around safety. It's known for it, black box thinking, and so on. So. Just let's look a little bit to the future, Mark. I'll start with you about where you think this is going and the use of high quality data, and then, like you say, bringing in that human expertise and having that data and the systems and humans working much more in tandem. Where do you see things going? We're in the age of AI, so no doubt that's going to have an impact.
It is definitely going to have an impact, and you said it. There's no. The safety industry has done a great job, and there's a reason that safety has done so well in aviation over the last few decades, and it's because there is no, commercial terms. There is no hiding my safety stuff. The community is very open when it comes to safety. We don't compromise, and we make sure that everybody else learns from our mistakes. So flight data, I think, will lead that discussion into the future. So Lee, I look at flight data and where it's going and have a few thoughts. Yeah. We've talked a lot about data fusion, combining it with other sources, expanding it beyond safety and pilots, moving into other parts of the business, other subject matter experts. But I think another point, I won't dwell on those. We've talked a lot about those already. Is the human, and Denise touched on this earlier, the human inside of flight data, and how do we incorporate that with leadership, subject matter experts, pilots, maintenance technicians? As Denise said, it does a really good job at telling you what, where, and when, but it doesn't do a great job of telling you why. And I say that why, at scale and with speed. Flight data, we're talking every flight, every day, every second of every flight. So to add the why at scale and speed is difficult, but I think it's a new frontier we're going to go into. And I do understand, and I completely understand there's crew contacts in the industry, there's incident investigations, all of those things happen, but they happen in very small samples, and we need to accelerate that and create that circular loop for flight data where the human frontline pilots, even subject matter experts, leaders, they're bringing their why these things are happening back into the system so that we can really leverage the power of why things are happening to get at better decisions. So that would be, one frontier that I think flight data is going to really accelerate over the next period of time. And staying on the human theme, I think we'll naturally see the industry get more prescriptive in their nature. So targeting and looking at, specific information, keeping with non-punitive safety culture principles. But if you think back over time, when we were trying to educate people, you'd start with what's happening in the industry, what's happening at my airline, what's happening with a fleet specific type information or a specific airport or procedure. But today, Mark wants to know what's happening with Mark. I want to know my data. I want to know how I can improve. And I think flight data is core. Like we could be right in the middle of pushing that next evolution of safety through the community. And lastly, Lee, you touched on AI, and that is definitely a wave of the future. It's definitely part of what's going to happen. And there's a lot going on with AI, machine learning models. But I think where you'll see the industry drive is Today, you have to program the system, vast amounts of data. You have to program it to go look for something to give you a result. Where new technologies that are coming out today, it will look at the data and tell us, here's something you need to know, something you didn't think to ask for. And I think the AI and the technology will be a huge driver in that front. It will also help automate and speed up the process it takes from getting data off the airplane till it's in a format that somebody can make a decision. You've gone from data to information. And I think AI and the new tools and things that are out there in the industry, that they will drive that and make the end user's job much easier and much faster. So we'll get to those critical points quicker. We'll do analysis quicker. We'll do data sets quicker. We'll do all of that much faster. And we'll find things that we're not even looking for today. So I think there's a huge opportunity, huge runway in front of us.
We'll go to Dr. Fan, because you mentioned education. That's what Dr. Fan's involved in, but also he's educating the next generation. And you might say that they're the first AI generation, because they're certainly digitally native, but they're also growing up in a world of AI as well. So you've got a great insight into what the future looks like from the human perspective. What from your students, do they expect this approach kind of being baked into a future industry where tech and AI and insights like this are absolutely expected and they trust them?
Oh, absolutely. I think that is very much a bit of a given, that we expect to know the data, we expect to be able to use the data. But beyond what we've been touching on up to now, which is the current commercial aviation that we're looking at, I would say that the future have a lot more to do with volume and intensity. The number of flights, number of people wanting to fly now is continuing to increase. So the congestion around the airport, congestion around the major trunk of the airways that we are flying is increasing. So flight data play a crucial role for us to be able to manage that volume and intensity in a safe way. Without the right amount of processing and the data, and that's where AI may have a role to play, it may be very difficult for us to keep the airspace safe for the volume that we are expecting to grow. So it's probably going to drive it. But what I want to put as a thought experiment is that we are now starting to talk about the urban air taxi, the eVTOL, autonomous, etc. We did a little calculation and simulation that was certain large city. If 5% of their taxi become urban air taxi, the frequency between takeoff and landing, we'll be talking about minutes.
Yeah.
How do we handle that airspace safely? It won't be just human anymore. We'll have to have a lot of the things where the flight, as well as many other data, have to come in for us to be able to create that safe future airspace. And so what we are doing and learning from the flight data world today build a foundation for us to create that future air system.
Yeah, I remember talking to somebody about the future of sort of air taxis and urban air mobility, and they were saying, look, these things are going to happen, but initially they will have a pilot, but actually they'll be safer without a pilot. But they'll have a pilot because you would never get in one if there wasn't a pilot. And it's a fascinating way to think about the future, where you do entrust the system way more than you maybe are naturally inclined to do. Denise, you're lucky. You get the last word on this, because we're about to close up. Looking to the future is always a little bit of a kind of hostage to fortune, because anything can happen often. And actually, I guess maybe there's been a focus on flight safety, particularly at the minute. There's been a few incidents. Having said that, the industry isn't unbelievably safe, and we know this. The record is astonishing compared to any other mass transport infrastructure. So just give us, if you can wrap up with your thoughts, what you've just heard from Mark and Ip-Shin Fang about how you see the future developing.
So as you mentioned, Lee, the future, the world of flying has been getting safer and safer over the years. But what we've done in the past, we were trying to learn from what went wrong. We were looking at single incidents and trying to learn why did they happen, what went wrong there. However, we have so much data for what went well. And I really hope that also into the future, we will leverage more and more that data of what went well to also know how we can apply that so things keep going well and keep being safer, even if the traffic increases.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point, because it goes well most of the time. So in actual fact, if you're getting data at all, you're always getting it from when things went well, and that's not, you know, that's not news, is it? It's not news when things go well. You almost, there's an expectation, especially in aviation, because it goes well so often.
Yes, definitely. So having much more data to work with because of that could also give much more potential for the future. Yeah.
Well, look, we're going to have to wrap things up. I think that's been a really interesting discussion into, I think, you know, everyone's talking about data and AI, and it's being applied across every industry, and no more so than in aviation. And you can see why, because there's so much potential there to make it part of the industry and enhance what we do, not least in the critical area of safety. So thank you ever so much for joining us for the last half hour or so. I hope everyone watching this thought that was a very interesting discussion and got a lot out of it. Do give us your questions. So I'm going to wrap up by saying thank you to Mark, thank you to Denise, and thank you to Dr. Fan. Great to see you all today, and hopefully we'll see you in person in some time soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you.